Scotia way. In 1921 on a windy day, a sailing ship was born, and the Bluenose was her name, and you'll never see her kind again. Bluenose, the ocean knows her name, sailors know how proud a ship was she. Bluenose, leaning in the winds, racing every wave on the sea. Her sails were snowy white, they strained against the mast. The waves rolled high as she went rolling past. And from the very first, the Bluenose loved to run. She loved the smell of sea and the sun. Bluenose, the ocean knows her name, sailors know how proud a ship was she. Bluenose, leaning in the wind, racing every wave on the sea. For 25 long years, she ruled the northern sea, riding like a queen upon the tide. But in the Caribbean, one dark and stormy day, she ran upon a reef and died. Who knows? The ocean knows her name, sailors know how proud a ship was she. Who knows? Leaning in the winds, racing every wave on the sea. Now just the other day, down Nova Scotia way, in Lunenburg they christened a new ship. Just like the old Bluenose, down to the very name, Bluenose lives and sails again. Bluenose, the ocean knows her name, sailors know how proud a ship was she. Bluenose, leaning in the wind, racing every wave on the sea. Bluenose, the ocean knows her name, sailors know how proud a ship was she. Bluenose, leaning in the wind, racing every wave on the sea. Racing every wave on the sea. Racing every wave on the sea.
Welcome, everyone. My name's Roy Rogers, and it's my great privilege to help present with Drexel TV here, Charlie Zom. Charlie is a powerful and evocative singer. He's a sweet guitar player. He's a pretty mean baron player, as you will see. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I've seen you with a flute in your hand on occasion.
Yeah, play flute and a little bit of penny whistle.
And a penny whistle as well. And
Not as good as you, though, Roy.
reasonable people will disagree about that. And you've been accused of some banjo playing as well, I understand.
The first instrument I learned how to play was a 5-string banjo.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I played in a bluegrass band for a few years in Florida, and started playing more and more guitar, and then eventually kind of phased out the banjo.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I played at home, but not really out much.
Yeah, yeah. So, are you originally from Florida, or if you're from around Philly?
Born in Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad's from Detroit, my mother's from Sudbury, Ontario, and grew up on an island on the east coast of Florida, in a little town called Indialantic, on one of the barrier islands, those long, thin islands. Grew up about 100 yards from the beach, and spent a lot of my formative years on the beach or on boats, and Melbourne and Indialantic, Florida didn't have a whole lot to offer in terms of Celtic music at that time. What I knew because my parents knew it, or my mother especially, being from Canada. The oral tradition and the musical traditions are very, very strong still in many parts of the rural country, and I learned a lot of the songs that I first knew from her.
Mm-hmm. I see. That's interesting. That explains the general interest in the Celtic music. I'm always fascinated by Americans that get involved in deeply in the Celtic tradition and where that comes from. And it comes from your mother. That's interesting. So you started with the banjo, and then you got into the guitar. And who would you say are your primary influences, if you had to say? Somebody like Stan Rogers, maybe, or?
I like Stan Rogers a lot, and there are so many different. My influences vary greatly. Certainly, having to do with maritime music, Stan Rogers is way up there. My singing influences vary from Glenn Yarbrough to even more, very traditional people too. I love the very strong baritone of Robert Goulet, and I like the guitar and vocals of John Denver. He was my first influence of singers with a guitar in their hand. A lot of singers sing, and a lot of guitarists play guitar. You rarely get that combination together, and he and Stan Rogers were very, very popular right about the same time, as a matter of fact. And coming from the different ends of the spectrum, Stan being very maritime, Denver being very Western, having been raised out in the Western states. And the Scottish music and Irish music was also very, very popular. My mother's side mostly, my dad not so much, but my mother's side, all her brothers and sisters play piano and guitar and mandolin and so on, and they all sing still together. And that's where that came from, and I just am kind of an extension of that. And I enjoy doing what I do, kind of carrying on that part of the tradition. This next song is written by a fellow named George Johnson, and he married his girlfriend back in 1864. He's from Hamilton, Ontario, and she was a former pupil of his. Unfortunately, though, the relationship was a rocky one because she was a very, very sick lady, but their love was very strong. And during one particularly difficult bout, he took a walk up to an old mill on top of a hill, and he wrote this song for his future wife, whose name is Maggie, and the song is called When You and I Were Young, Maggie. I wandered today to the hill, Maggie, to view the scene below, the creek and the rusty old mill, Maggie, where we sat long ago. The green grove is gone from the hill, Maggie, where first the daisy sprung. The rusty old mill is still, Maggie, since you and I were young. Our dreams, they never came true, Maggie. Our hopes, they were not meant to be. When first I said only you, Maggie, and you said you loved only me. And now we are aged and gray, Maggie. Trials of life nearly done, but to me you're as fair as you were, Maggie, when you and I were young. Yes, to me
when you and I were young. There's a great old song that comes from one of the beautiful gems of the islands of Scotland. This one is called Mingle A. We might not even know about it had it not been for a fellow named Hugh Robertson who translated it from the native language of Scotland Gaelic into English about 150 years ago so we can all enjoy it. And the song is a fisherman's chanty, a song that they would sing while pulling in the nets. And it's a song that is sung like this. Heel ya ho, boys, let her go, boys, bring her head around into the weather. Heel ya ho, boys, let her go, boys, sailing homeward to Mingle A. What care we though white the minches? What care we now for wind and weather? Bring her head around every inches, sailing homeward to Mingle A. Heel ya ho, boys, let her go, boys, bring her head around into the weather. Heel ya ho, boys, let her go, boys, sailing homeward to Mingle A. Wives are waiting on the rocky banks, or looking seaward through the heather. Bring her head around, and we'll anchor ere the sun sets on Mingle A. Heel ya ho, boys, let her go, boys, bring her head around into the weather. Heel ya ho, boys, let her go, boys, sailing homeward to Mingle A. Heel ya ho, boys, let her go, boys, bring her head around now all together. Heel ya ho, boys, let her go, boys, sailing homeward to Mingle A. Sailing homeward to Mingle A. Sailing homeward to Mingle A.
Where do you collect your tunes? You were talking about the oral tradition that your mother, passed down on you. It's always a treat for somebody like me who, considers himself fairly well hooked into the traditional music scene to meet somebody and hear somebody who has all this material that I've never heard before. Yeah.
I get a chance to travel a good bit here and there. These days, it's so easy to find the kind of music that you want. You can via the web, you can go anywhere you want in the whole world. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, it was not nearly that way at all. You'd get it by going to folk festivals. You'd listen to other musicians. You'd take their advice on somebody you need to go see next time he or she is through town, and you do that. There was always the record store, but the kind of music that I liked when I was growing up, where I grew up in Florida, what didn't exist. You did not hear Celtic music. It's all over the place now down there, but in the early 70s, you wouldn't hear it anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I'd only hear it when I'd leave, which is why I kind of started playing the banjo. I loved the traditional tunes you could play, and started playing that because the bluegrass bands, which are heavily influenced on the instrumental side from Irish and Scottish fiddle tunes, were a lot more commonplace than any Celtic group you'll ever see. And I was in a group called New River Bluegrass. We played all over Florida for at least the couple of years that I was with them. We played here and there, and so. But it comes from all over. Today, it's a whole different ballgame. But a while back, as you would know, 20 years ago and so on, it was a lot more difficult. But when you found something great, you knew you were onto something. And so you did your best to learn it quickly and to sing it for others.
I think you're doing mainly Celtic today, but you're steeped in American music as well.
Yes. More actually, it's funny. I grew up more on Celtic music than I did on American, but in the last few years, I've just not rediscovered it because I've always enjoyed it, but I've spent a lot more time studying it, and especially songs of the Civil War time period is a big influence. Not a big influence, but is a great point of interest for me. And so I've rediscovered a treasure trove of traditional songs that I really hadn't spent a whole lot of time trying to learn in the last, I should say the first 33 years of my life.
Yeah, and it's fun to trace the direct line from Scotland and Ireland to the eastern United States, and as it spreads out into the Appalachian Mountains, and see how it morphs into how step dancing changes into clogging and eventually into tap dancing, and so much of the American bluegrass just comes right out of Irish and Scottish dance music.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, and even a couple of examples of songs that have morphed significantly. You would know the song "The Bard of Armagh." Well, when that traveled west, and there's a lot of different ways it could do it. It could do it as an Irish song. It could go in the Irish gangs that were laying down railroad tracks, and a lot of these fellows, when they just got tired of laying track, they just settled down right there, and they have their songs. Maybe their kids would learn the song and maybe change it. Well, it turned into Streets of Laredo not too long after it came here, and the great old sea chanty, which is, nobody knows the most original form of it, but Shenandoah is a beautiful song, which if you watch 1930s and 40s westerns, you'll hear it sung as a western, and it's an anthem of these old western movies, because the cowboys on the other side of North America sang it as a western song. They didn't know it as anything else. But if you go to the east, you'd hear it as a capstan chanty.
It's amazing how much history one absorbs when you start to dig into this music as well.
Yeah, and you'll get a whole new respect for the men and women who sung these songs. And oftentimes the folks who sang a lot of these songs didn't know more than 20, 25 songs. They knew the songs that they heard. But really until, trains came along, most folks didn't travel more than 20 miles away from their home their whole life. And so the songs, especially in the Appalachians, for instance, they were, you'd go to one area and you'd hear the same sphere of songs, the same sphere of influence. And you go to some other place and you hear a whole different set of songs, and maybe some of them were different. Were changed, and but when you learn them, you learn the history behind them, and a lot of them can be traced to another century and another country completely, and the people may change, the places may change, the sentiment oftentimes stays much the same. If it's a love song or a song of someone passing away, those can change a good bit. But the songs, especially the ones about longing for home, those don't change a whole lot, because that deep down there's this kernel of longing for the home, that while you may love America or Canada, North America, States or Canada, and appreciate all that's here, especially for a first-generation immigrant, there's always something that will never leave the country that you've left behind, and that shows up in the songs of those who came over here, and they wrote the songs from the heart. They didn't write them for the stage. They wrote them because that's what they knew. And someone would hear them, and they'd be passed along from generation to generation, turned around, almost like, if you can imagine, like a potter's wheel spinning around, and it's just being worked over by different families, different generations, different regions. And that's why we have such a wide array of beautiful traditional American songs that we do today.
I've also heard people describe some of these ballads as essentially the newspaper of that area for that time, because the only way they could communicate even political news was through a song about what this king was doing or what this duke was doing or whatever.
That's very, very true. I mean, that goes, old broadsides that you hear in the early states or colonies or in Europe. Oftentimes, those were written to tell about some great event. And there's also a tradition of people with money paying folks, harpers or pipers or other balladeers to write songs about their families. The old bardic tradition of Ireland, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, and you might have spoken about on your previous shows. Oftentimes, these fellows would memorize books almost, having to do with one family's glory, and that goes back, as far back as anybody could possibly imagine. But yeah, certainly even today, there's singers and songwriters, even in the age of the internet. There's something that's still very, very important about an event being encapsulated in a 4 or 6 minute song, because it says more than just the event. There's a whole emotion behind it that you can't portray in any other medium other than song.
My heart's in the Highlands, my heart is not here. My heart's in the Highlands, chasing the deer, chasing the wild deer and following the road. My heart's in the Highlands, wherever I go. Farewell to the Highlands, all covered with snow. Farewell to the straths and green valleys below. Farewell to the torrents and wild hanging woods. Farewell to the torrents and gathering floods. My heart's in the Highlands, my heart is not here. My heart's in the Highlands, chasing the deer, chasing the wild deer and following the roe. My heart's in the Highlands, wherever I go. Farewell to the North, the birthplace of valor, the country of worth. Wherever I wander, wherever I rove, the hills of the Highlands forever I love. My heart's in the Highlands, my heart is not here. My heart's in the Highlands, chasing the deer, chasing the wild deer, following the roe. My heart's in the Highlands, wherever I go. My heart's in the Highlands, wherever I go. When I've done the work of day and I row my boat away down the waters of Loch Tay, when the evening light is falling and I look towards Ben Lawes, where the afterglories glow, and I dream on to bright eyes with a merry mouth below. She's my beauteous neon rue. She's my joy and sorrow too, though I know she is not true. Sure I cannot help but falling, for my heart's a boat in tow, and I'd give the world to know if she means to let me go as I sing, oh, lovely hair has more beauty, I declare, than all the tresses fair from Killen to Aberfeldy. Be they red, white, gold, or brown, be they blacker than the snow, they mean not as much to me as a melting flake of snow. And her smile is like the gleam of the sunlight on the stream, and the songs that we folks sing, they're the songs she sings at Milton. But my heart is full of woe, for last night she bade me go, and I'd give the world to know as I sing, my heart is full of woe, for last night she bade me go, and the tears begin to flow as I sing. Here's a good old sea shanty back during the great age of sail. The men who were working those tall ships, and by the way, the age of sail more or less ended with the beginning of World War I. They'd sing sea chanties in order to, A, keep their spirits up under the hot Caribbean sun or in the windy, cold North Atlantic, and also, two, to help keep them on perfect timing when they're doing their very, very dangerous tasks that were essentially done with like a well-oiled machine. Had to be the cadence was always very, very clear. Otherwise, it would not be nearly as effective. And this is one song that they used to sing. It's called "We'll Roll the Old Chariot Along." Well, we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along, and we'll all fall in behind. Well, a pint of of Irish stew wouldn't do us any harm. A plate of Irish stew wouldn't do us any harm. A plate of Irish stew wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all fall in behind. And we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all fall in behind. Well, a little drop of rum wouldn't do us any harm. A little drop of rum wouldn't do us any harm. A little drop of rum wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all fall in behind. And we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all fall in behind. Well, if the devil's in the way, then we'll roll right over him. If the devil's in the way, we'll roll right over him. If the devil's in the way, we'll roll right over him. And we'll all fall in behind. And we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all fall in behind. And we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all fall in behind.
One of the most appealing things about this music is the integration that it has and had with daily life. I mean, you spoke about it with the sea shanties. You know how it was a tool in a way to get the rhythm going for the work on the ships, and I just really admire that integration as compared to the pop music today. You know, Madonna singing about a material girl, which is just a flip joke. That's all it is. It has very little value. Whereas so many of these songs are documents of a time and of a way of life.
Yeah, they oftentimes are a snapshot of what life was like in one particular area. The song Mingle A, I think, is an incredibly picturesque song. There may be more verses, I know 2 or 3, but it gives you a perfect example, or not a perfect example, but it gives you a picture of what life was like on the island of Mingle A at the time this song was originally sung as a work song. I sing it as something to share with an audience, but originally the fellas singing this song had no audience but each other on this boat, oftentimes in the rain. A lot of them could not swim. If they fell off, they were gone. You didn't learn how to swim when the water was so cold because you would die. And they would sing these songs to keep their spirits up, to help keep the power in what they're doing. Otherwise, without the song, where would they be? It's just a miserable existence. And that goes all over the world. I was watching something on TV the other day about these poor folks in Africa, and they're just banging corn all day long. That's all they know. But they have so many different songs to go along with banging that corn into powder, which we made into bread and other things. And when I was watching that, I thought that's a lot like what these fellows are doing. That's a difficult life. You're up before dawn. You're not getting home until sometimes after dark. And it's your songs to keep your spirits up when you're working as hard as you can possibly work. And in some cases, perhaps like those fellows on Mingle A, by the way, the island is depopulated now. Nobody lives there year-round because it's such a difficult life. They would keep these songs to keep their spirits up, because without their song, where would they be?
Yeah, and another song that I know you do that absolutely cuts to the bone. There's nothing more basic. Is that love song that the man wrote for his ill wife. What's the name of that song? My Heart is a Boat in Tow.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, that song is called the Lochte Boat Song. And it's unfortunately, his wife is not ill. It's a girl that he's in love with. And it's an old song of unrequited love.
I'm sorry, I got them mixed up.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I know a lot of songs about ill people too, people dying. But that particular song is a beautiful traditional song from Lochte, and it's a song that it comes from that great body of song of one person falling in love with another, and the other person's love is not returned. Luckily, this fellow doesn't die at the end, like so many do.
Yeah.
But it's still it's a bit of a tearjerker.
It's a beauty, and you made me think of Seamus Heaney. I think he said he was getting impatient with everyone labeling Celtic music as sad all the time, and he says it's not sadness, it's longing, which I thought was an important distinction that I like and remember. But so the song that I had it confused with then was When You and I Were Young, Maggie.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's my confusion. Yes, yes. George Johnson wrote the song. Actually, he wrote it as a poem originally, and there's a few different versions. There's an Irish version, and I actually kind of combined the two a little bit. There's an Irish version that was written. Your viewers will know, but it's the. I'm forgetting the fellow name who wrote it as I'm sitting here, but it was written for actually a play called Nora. But the song that I sing, When You and I Were Young, Maggie, goes back to 1864, originally a poem. Somebody else put the music to it a bit later. There's actually a monument to Maggie Johnson, and George Johnson, however, lived to about 1919. He moved out to California, was married twice more after Maggie passed away, and he died out there in California.
That's a beautiful one. It's really a lovely one. Do you write your own material sometimes?
I do. Not a whole lot. Not because I don't like to, but because I get... History was one of my majors in college, but I had a great interest in it before that. And in fact, it's history which drove me into music a little more, other than... Some people are interested in music first, and learning the history comes later. For me, it was actually the opposite. I played the banjo, which was fun, but a lot of the ballads that I play and sing come out of my love for history, and which works great together, because oftentimes I know the subject matter a lot more than I know a song until I find this great song, and that works well with what I knew about this particular moment in a time or place, and they go together well. I try to combine them when I can. My interest in the Civil War is actually rooted in the 79th New York Highlanders, which was originally a state militia organized in 1859 by the Caledonian Society of New York. They had almost 400 men when Uncle Abe called for volunteers to fight in what was later called the Civil War. At that time, it was called the War of Rebellion in the North and the War of Northern Aggression in the South. And I like learning about those men, and there's the most recent song I've written has to do with two men emigrate from Scotland to the States. And next time you have me on your show, I'll sing it for you then, but they're both named Campbell. One fella settles in New York, the other fellow settles in Charleston, and they actually fight against each other on James Island, South Carolina, at the Battle of Secessionville in June of 1862. Right. And they were within 60 yards of each other through the battle. They didn't see each other, but they could have just as easily killed each other as they would have killed any other man on that field.
Remarkable, remarkable. Since we're speaking about history, I hear you do the minstrel boy with the baron, kind of as an a cappella, with the self-accompanied percussion, which is a really nice effect. I've heard the song 1,000 times. I really love your interpretation of it. It's very powerful, but I don't know anything of the history behind that song.
That song was written by Thomas Moore, an Irish fellow who lost friends during the rebellion of 1798. And he wrote the song sometime later in memory of his, there were two friends in particular who died in that rebellion, which was a rebellion actually more of the middle class, but it also caught on to the peasant class. Originally that rise, Theobald Wolfe-Tone was one of the leaders of that, and he was also a Protestant, by the way. The Protestants, one of their big issues was that they were taxed unfairly. They felt, much like American colonists felt, they were taxed unfairly, and that was the roots of that rising. But the writers who wrote about it and wrote about the agitation were of that middle class. But of course, they had a common enemy. Is not the term I want to use, but we'll use it. They had a problem with the crown, as did the peasantry of Ireland, and the grievances were the same. And on that plane, they found common ground, and so certainly the peasantry rose up too, and it was put down pretty brutally in some cases. And but Thomas Moore, great Irish poet, wrote that song.
Okay, thanks. And I know there's another song that you do, the Bluenose, I think it is.
Yes.
Um, you can see, since these fellows were basically staking their lives on these boats, you can see why they would fall in love with them. This song is almost a love song to a boat, in a way.
It is exactly that. It's a song. The Bluenose was a two-masted schooner, and the keel was laid, as they say, in Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, Canada. And it was around for 25 years. And the first several years of that, while it was built to be a working ship, it was never meant to be a yacht or something to win a lot of the regattas of New England. It turned out to be one of the fastest ships on the waves, and it won many a race in her day. But unfortunately, as many of the wooden ships did, it fell into disrepair and spent many of her final years actually hauling bird dung to be used as fertilizer, and fell in disrepair and sank in a storm in the Caribbean. The Canadians realized what they lost. They built a Bluenose 2, and which is in perfect condition, by the way. They will never let the Bluenose 2, which you can find in Atlantic Canada, become the same sort of condition that the Bluenose 1 was in. And you'll see the Bluenose on the back of the Canadian dime, and really you'll see it everywhere as a symbol. They remember the first several years of the Bluenose's life, not the last.
That's very nice. Yeah.
The minstrel boy to the war is gone. In the ranks of death you will find him. His father's sword he has girded on, with his wild harp slung behind him. Land of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least thy rights shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee. The minstrel fell, but the foeman's chains could not bring his proud soul under. The harp he wore never spoke again, for he tore its cords asunder, and said, no chain shall sully thee, thou soul of love and bravery. Your songs were writ for the pure and the free, they shall never sound in slavery. And said, no chain shall sully thee, thou soul of love and bravery. Your songs were writ for the pure and the free, they shall never sound in slavery. Your songs were writ for the pure and the free, they shall never sound in slavery.
I understand that you have, I know you have a web page, www.charliezom,
That's right.
Z-A-H with an M,
Right.
.com.
That's right.
And I'm hearing rumors about a video as well.
Yeah, I was invited to Scotland with a Manhattan ballet in the summer of 2002. I was not dancing.
Wait a minute. What's this deal?
Luckily for the Scots, I was not dancing on that tour. It was the Infinity Dance Theater out of Manhattan. One of the fellows in that theater's name is Andrew McGee, who's Andrew McMillan, who's not a dancer, but he's an Emmy award-winning actor and a great narrator and a former newsman, believe it or not, in his earlier days. he wrote this tribute to the Macmillans throughout the ages, and he has these great dramatic narrative parts. And there are so many songs which some touch on the Macmillan clan, some don't, but that I was asked to sing, and I helped put the music together for this 1-hour program, which we've done. We've done it in New York, we've done it in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, we've done it in Scotland, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime real soon. But we brought it over to Scotland in the summer, and while I was over there, I was tramping around the countryside with Michael Fitch, who is the executive producer of the ballet, who actually is a well-known videographer in that field of videography, and he travels all over the country doing that. And we digitally taped me singing to 11 songs, which I had recorded in various beautiful, picturesque, in front of this castle, in front of that bridge, by that shoreline, that sort of thing. And that's actually available now, so maybe some of your viewers might enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. And are they all, I assume they're all Scottish, and they're probably tied into the backgrounds that you're looking at? And
They are. Well, in some cases they are tied to the backgrounds. They're all Scottish. I wrote one of them, which is Scottish in sentiment, having to do with an expatriate Scot. I'm from the States, but the sentiment is that of someone who is longing for his homeland.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the songs we did, I was invited to sing at what they were calling the Great Return of Macmillans. They had Macmillans coming from all over the four corners of the globe, and they met in Iona, Scotland, which is where Christianity took root. And the Iona Abbey is a 13th century structure which had fallen into disrepair and has been completely refurbished. And that's where the ceremony took place. I sang Amazing Grace there, not a Scottish song, but it was taped there, and the walls, and there are, countless saints or men who should be saints, kings and queens, buried among the hills of Iona within a few hundred yards of where I was singing. And it was a very moving experience for me to be able to sing that song there.
Yeah. I bet your deep voice just reverberated amongst those ruins.
I loved it. It was great. There are very few places I've sung that have meant as much there. I've sung in some big theaters, but in that beautiful abbey, whose stone walls have seen so much in the last several centuries, it was a moving experience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's been great to be around you and your music, so thanks.
Thank you, Roy.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Okay.
Last night I was dreaming of the land of my fathers in the twilight of my memory, where dark mountains meet o'er heather so sweet as the mist rolling in o'er the sea, where the wind sings its chorus through forest and glen, and the lassies greet you with a smile. It's there I could stray for a while, where the pipes greet the morning is Cape Breton's isle. She's the star of the ocean, my heart's own delight, from the Horseshoe to the Seal Island light. She's a lady that beckons me all through the night, Cape Breton, my sweet Highland home. My granddaddy was a Neil's Harbor boatman, proud of the bark he sailed in, and the forest of masts with the rigging held fast as the bay came to life with the wind. Yes, and oh, how I wish I could see them again as they pulled in a fight against time to haul in the fish and the line, the catch of Cape Breton and bounty so fine. She's the star of the ocean, my heart's own delight, from the Copins of Horseshoe to the Seal Island light. She's a lady that beckons me all through the night, Cape Breton, my sweet Highland home. Now the years have gone by, so quickly they fly, and I'm bound from my own country. Though I've traveled all over, from the white cliffs of Dover to the blue of the far China Sea, sure I'd give all I own just to be on the Myra and fish with the old boys at dawn. For it's there that the friendships live on, the fairest green island I've ever known. She's the star of the ocean, my heart's only right. From the cold winds of Horseshoe to the seal island light, she's a lady that beckons me all through the night. Cape Breton, my sweet Highland home. She's the star of the ocean, my heart's only light. From the cold winds of Horseshoe to the seal island light, she's a lady that beckons me all through the night. Cape Breton, my sweet Highland home. Cape Breton, my sweet Highland home. Cape Breton, my sweet Highland home.